Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar, Government Immigration Data and how to use it and why it matters. We have a great presentation ahead of us with a lot of interesting information. So as always, today's broadcast is being recorded, and we will send you a link to download that recording and the slide deck tomorrow afternoon. So please keep an eye out on that follow-up email. And if you don't receive it, just let us know. Additionally, we will be emailing the continuing education credits from SHRM and HRCI in that follow-up email. Again, if you don't receive those, just let us know. We also encourage you to ask some questions throughout the main presentation today. To do so, please use the GoToWebinar control box that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. Type that question in, and we'll try to get to it either during the main presentation or at the end during the main question and answer session. All right, for those unfamiliar with Envoy, for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 150 countries, has grown 41% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We're particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. And introducing the first of our two main presenters today is I'd like to introduce Manu Sivanandam, Envoy Global's Chief Operating Officer. Manu oversees all service delivery, including managing relationships with Envoy-affiliated legal service providers, growing global service delivery, and continuing to evolve Envoy's offerings for its customers. Also joining us this afternoon is Ryan Bay, partner at Global Immigration Associates. Ryan has over 8 years of immigration experience. He received his BA from Monmouth College, and then he went on to Western State University, where he was awarded his JD cum laude in 2010. Ryan is currently licensed to practice law in Illinois and maintains eligibility to resume active status in California. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Right, thank you, Eric.
All right. Taking a brief look at today's agenda before I turn it over, we're going to go over first start off with some common immigration data terms that you need to know and what they mean, and then dive deep into some very interesting graphs, charts, and all that good stuff. And finally, just a quick disclaimer that the content in this presentation is not intended as legal advice. If you have questions or additional information on the issues discussed, please consult with the Envoy-affiliated attorney or another qualified professional. All right, Manu, I'm going to turn it over to you first, starting with immigration data. What is it?
Great, thank you, Eric, and welcome everyone to this today's webinar on government immigration data, how to use it, and why it matters. So, as Eric mentioned in today's webinar, I'm going to start by just introducing what are the main sources of government data, and then we'll take a deep dive into what some of that data shows in terms of trends on approval rates, RFEs, even salary levels in LCA filings, and some trends on nationalities as well. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can use data to really shape your immigration program and advance it forward. So to kick things off, what are some of the data sources out there on immigration data? So there are really three main sources on immigration data from the US government. The first, of course, is the USCIS. The second is Department of Homeland Security, and the third is the DOL, Department of Labor. There's also some information you'll find at the State Department as well. So a couple of, I think, important points to note. The first is immigration data there's actually quite a lot of public data out there on immigration. And this can be, we think, very useful both to help get a picture of what's happening in the broader landscape and what are some of the trends, but also to have a look even more locally at what's happening in your local market and what's happening perhaps to some of the other companies in your industry as well. Now, all that said, while all this data exists and while there's a lot of rich information out there, unfortunately it can be really hard to find. Sometimes it's buried in different parts of a government website. It's not always obvious where it is. And then more importantly, it can often be a little bit hard to actually decipher. The data is not always in an easy-to-use format. There are obviously certain definitions as well to figure out, and that can be sometimes not so straightforward. So what we've done at Envoy is we've taken a lot of this government data, and our data science team has worked to analyze it and to really try and pull out interesting insights from that data in a format that's sort of digestible for all of us. And so we'll start going through some of those trends now. So first of all, just some common immigration terms for those of you who are less familiar with the immigration space. I won't go through all of this in detail, and if you have any questions, as Eric mentioned, do post them on the webinar Q&A, and either myself or Ryan Bay, partner at GIA, can answer those questions for you. So I won't go through all of these. As I said, I think many of you are probably very familiar with RFEs, probably more familiar than you'd like to be, SOC titles and LCAs. The one I will just mention is fiscal year. One thing to note, as some of you may already know, is the government fiscal year begins on October 1st and ends September 30th. And so this is typically the year that you'll see quoted by the USCIS and often other government agencies when you look at government data. So for example, if you look at fiscal year 2018, what that's actually referencing is October 1st, 2017 through to September 30th, 2018. So just something to bear in mind as you compare across years whenever you see fiscal year. All right, and with that, without further ado, we'll jump into some of the actual data itself. So the first section we have is on approval rates and RFEs. And as we go through this, just to reiterate, all of the data we're going to share in today's presentation, all of it is from public data. So all of this is from government data sources. As we mentioned earlier, either the USCIS or the Department of Labor. And none of the data we have is private or confidential or anything like that at all. It's all publicly available information. So this first chart shows the approval rate for H-1Bs and is by fiscal year, as I mentioned earlier. And I think what I'm sure obviously jumps out to all of you, and no doubt is perhaps not a huge surprise, is that the approval rate for H-1Bs has declined fairly significantly from 2017 through to 2019 year to date. So you can see that it used to be hovering at around 92-93% approval rates, but now is actually at or maybe even just below 80% approval rates. And so we've seen this really significant decline in approval rates. Now, a couple of important points to note. The first is this does, of course, vary significantly by industry. And so as you look at this, it may well be that you're in an industry where approval rates run particularly high or run particularly low. And so that's something to bear in mind as you think about the context of this. A second point to note is, and we'll come to this, is the real driver of this in many ways, and you'll see this, is what's been happening to RFEs. And so we'll come to that and we'll talk about the increase in RFEs and the reduction in approval rate for those petitions that get an RFE that's helped contribute to this. And that's not the only driver, but it's one of the factors.
So Manu and Ryan, we actually just got a question right now. Which industries tend to run high or low? High-low when it comes to approval rates?
Generally, it's consulting agencies that have a higher RFE and denial rate. The government, under the Buy American, Hire American policy in 2016, they really started to crack down on those companies who place their foreign nationals at a different work site of a different company. So it's definitely, I would say, looked down upon by the government, and it was bad. Now it's really bad. So the issues we generally see is, let's say Acme Corporation is placing their John Doe H-1B worker at Beta Corporation, but Beta doesn't want to give up their company contracts or client contracts or purchase order, that type of thing. So the case is pretty much dead in the water at that point, and a lot of companies are finding it hard to accommodate these requests from the government.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So just jumping to the next slide, and so this slide here is in the same format as the previous one, but this one now shows the approval rate for L1As and L1Bs. And here you can see that the approval rate has also gone down really steadily from fiscal year 2016 to year to date. So gone down from being around 85% to now being closer to a 75% approval rate. And you'll see that this has been perhaps more of a steady decline than what occurred with H-1Bs. And you will also notice that overall, the approval rate for L1As and L1Bs in total, for L visas here, is lower than the approval rate for H-1Bs. And then moving on to TN visas, you'll see here that the TN visa rate, the approval rate actually remains relatively high. It's certainly come down from where it was in 2015, where it was closer to 95%, but it's remained in the last few years in the high 80s to 90% range. So a meaningfully higher approval rate in TNs, certainly compared to L visas and to H-1Bs. And again, as we mentioned earlier, these, as Ryan referenced, can vary very significantly by industry, but they do give you a good sense, I think, for seeing what's happening nationally, and in particular, seeing what's happening in terms of the trend, like how much the approval rate has gone down for different visa classes. So as I referenced earlier, one of the big drivers of this has been the increase in RFE rates. And so the chart on the left-hand side, and some of you may well have seen this chart that we've used before, shows the what percentage of H-1B petitions receive an RFE. And again, it's all shown by fiscal year. And on the right-hand side, the bar chart shows of those petitions that receive an RFE, what's the approval rate of those petitions. And so really you've got two effects that are occurring here in parallel. The first is a very steep increase in the RFE rate. So you can see from fiscal year 2017, an RFE rate that was around 20%. For fiscal year 2019, year to date, it's now approaching almost 50% in terms of the H-1B petitions which get an RFE. So almost half of petitions filed in fiscal year 2019 have received an RFE. And compounding that impact has, of course, been the fact that the approval rate for those petitions that get an RFE has been steadily going down. So from being around the low 80% range to now being in the mid 60% range in fiscal year 2019 year to date. And so this effect has obviously had a really big impact on the overall approval rate for H-1B. So as you get more petitions getting RFEs, and those ones with an RFE have a lower approval rate, that drives down the average approval rate for all H-1Bs here. And that, of course, is in addition to just the consequences of the delay that RFEs obviously cause petitions, even when they do get ultimately approved. And what we found, for those of you on this webinar, what we found that many of the HR leaders that we speak to find useful is they find useful sort of sharing some of this information with their employee population. It can help manage expectations, and even with our hiring managers around the RFE rate, to show how much it's increased and how common it's become. And so employees that receive an RFE, or a hiring manager that candidate receives an RFE, is able to see it in context and to recognize that actually it's part of a much broader trend that's occurring across all companies across the country when it comes to RFEs. Okay, and so in a similar fashion as we did for approval rates, we'll move through different visa types here as well. And so this chart shows the RFE rate by visa type. And so you can see TNs followed by Ls followed by H1Bs. And so, and this is for fiscal year 2018. And so you can see here when you compare across visa types, L visas really stick out here and have, an almost 45% RFE rate in fiscal year 2018. And so as you can imagine, those visas are obviously facing particular scrutiny, and that can create particular time delays with those particular visas.
Speaking of that, Ryan, are you able to shed any insight on why L1s are facing higher scrutiny?
Differentiate it between L1A and L1B.
Yes.
L1A, it has always been somewhat easy for law firms and companies to determine if it's going to be approved. There's a clear-cut standard. L1Bs, it's not true at all. Even before 2016, they're particularly very tricky to deal with. It's very subjective on how you qualify. So it's very interesting, you submit 2 petitions, exact same position, qualifications, all that stuff. One can be approved and one couldn't. So it's hard to define how you qualify to the government because each government officer is going to be different. And what we think, and that was even before 2016, so nowadays it's even worse, and I think there's a tendency to almost just issue an RFE on L1B unless a person developed or created a product, although that shouldn't be the criteria to qualify. So I think it's the subjectivity of government officers in the L1 process.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And to reference one of the points I mentioned around L1As and the difference between L1As and L1Bs in terms of both the process and obviously the impact here on RFE rates. Some of this data we're able to break down because the government breaks it down, and unfortunately some of it we're not able to break it down simply because that's how it's provided by the USCIS. So just something to bear in mind as you look at some of this data. Some you can get more granular on, and some's a little bit more challenging. So we just showed just now the 2018 trend. This now shows fiscal year 2019, and you can see here that sort of in line with L visas having a higher RFE rate, they also have a lower approval rate as well here. So just over half of L visas getting approved compared to closer to just over 60% for H1Bs and just under 60% for TN visas. Okay, and then this final slide in this section, before we jump into some salary and demographics data, really just ties it all together and shows the approval rate for petitions in 2019, which received an RFE rate. And you can see here L visas again sticking out here in terms of having a lower approval rate for those petitions that receive an RFE. Great, so we wanted to provide in that last section just a high-level summary of some of the trends that are happening in RFEs, how those trends vary by visa type, and also some of the trends in approval rates as well. And again, as you mentioned, that we think can be very helpful as you look at your own employee population and around what's happening in the broader landscape, obviously recognizing some of the very stark differences by industry that do occur. In this next set of information, we're actually going to draw upon information from LCAs. So for those of you who are not familiar, and I'm sure most of you are, on the LCA submitted to the Department of Labor, it does require providing salary information for that particular role. LCAs are all publicly available data at the DOL. Of course, the name of the individual is anonymized, so you don't know which foreign national it's related to, but you do know the name of the company, you do know the SOC code, you do know the salary level, you do know the industry classification, so on and so forth. And so what our data science team has done at Envoy is to take all of this data, and this is data across hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of LCAs going back in time, and we've taken that to look at some trends and to find some benchmarks that we think you may find useful. And as we go into this section, I think what's interesting here is it's useful not just, I think, from a immigration and a global mobility perspective, but can also be useful even for your compensation and benefits teams or for your talent acquisition teams as they think through what are some of the salary levels that are out there in the marketplace. And perhaps what differentiates this is, this is data submitted to the government, so this is not self-declared employee salary data, like, for example, other sources like Glassdoor or standard surveys. So on this first slide on page 22, we have shown here salary bands for the computer and electronic product manufacturing industry. So we wanted to pick a couple of examples here. That we've got 3 examples that different industries that we thought you all might find quite interesting. And so within this industry, we've then shown salary levels for 3 different common SOC codes here. So software developer applications, SOC code 151132, all other computer occupations, 151199, and other operations research analysts, SOC code 152030. And then for each of these, 3 numbers represent the following. The middle represents the average. The first number represents the 25th percentile. And the third number represents the 75th percentile. So in other words, the average paid for software developer applications in that SOC code was $113,000 in this industry. Someone who's at the 25th percentile, so just in the bottom quarter, would get an average salary of $96,500. And at the 75th percentile, it would be $126,000. It's the same format for all of this. So this, we found, many clients have found this to be really valuable at looking at this data compared to their own salary levels, where they fit in terms of are they competitive and getting a good sense of what's happening in the market. And of course, we've sliced this data here by industry, but you can just as easily slice it by geography as well. And so you could look at, for example, what's happening in your local geography, perhaps against the employers that you're competing with on a daily basis for talent. So using the exact same format, we've then replicated this for the pharmaceutical and medical manufacturing industry. And we've chosen the same SOC codes for consistency. And you can see here the ranges again, the averages, the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. And what's interesting here is that actually for software developers, the salary bands are very similar to what we saw in the computer and electronic product manufacturing industry. However, the other 2 roles here, all other computer occupations and operations research analysts, the salary here is actually a little bit higher than it is in the prior industry we just looked at. And again, there's a lot of nuances here about geography that play into this, and so no doubt many of you would find this most useful at a geography level, and we'll come to that very shortly as well. So the final example of industry here was fintech. So we looked at financial software and the salary levels here, again for the same three SOC codes. So I'll just pause for a second while you can take a quick look and at these numbers. Great. So pivoting now. So that was information about salaries. We can also look at who are the largest and who are the fastest growing filers in an area. And so we use an example here of Austin, Texas. And what we've shown on this list are the largest LCA filers in Q1 2019. And again, this is all based on public government data. This is all based on the number of LCA petitions submitted to the Department of Labor. And again, this is just LCAs. It, of course, may not reflect actual petitions filed, and it certainly won't reflect approvals, but it does give you, I think, a good directional sense of scale. And you can see here the top 10 in Austin. I'm sure some are perhaps less surprising, like Dell, obviously a major tech employer in the Austin area. But some of these you may find surprising in terms of who are some of the larger players that are also hiring foreign talent in the Austin market. In addition to looking at the largest companies, we know that many of you may also find interesting who are the fastest growing when it comes to hiring foreign talent. And so on this slide, what we've shown here are the number of LCAs filed in Q1 2018 compared to Q1 2019. And we picked some examples of companies that have grown particularly quickly in those over that 1 year period. Now, I think a couple of caveats. Of course, if you start with a low base, like 1 or 2 filings, then any growth can look quite big, and so that's something to bear in mind. Second caveat, of course, is some of this may be a one-time lift, It may be someone who has a particular project to staff up, and that's why they've increased over a year. It may not reflect long-term trends. But all of that in mind, it does give, I think, an interesting picture of who's sort of expanding when it comes to foreign talent, and who may be potentially even companies that may be attracting your existing foreign talent employees to keep an eye on. So, for example, I was surprised to see, for example, Google here, and they're obviously expanding relatively meaningfully here in the Austin, Texas area, in addition, of course, to their offices in the West Coast and elsewhere across the country. So that was looking at one market. We wanted to also just extrapolate up a level, and this is now using data from the USCIS. So we're now going to switch from LCA filings here to H-1Bs, petitions. And this data we thought was very interesting, and it shows the salary trends for H-1B petitions. And again, some of you may have seen this when we've shared this previously. But for those who haven't, this shows the percentage of H-1Bs who receive a salary over $100,000. And what's interesting is there's been a really dramatic increase. In around 2012, around 17% of H-1B petitions had a salary of over $100,000, whereas just 5 years later, in 2017, that number had almost doubled to being just over 30%. And so, perhaps demonstrating the real value here of foreign talent, some of the roles that have been filled. In a similar vein, we want to look also at the education level of the average H-1B petition. And again, this is all data from the USCIS. And this shows what percentage of H-1B petitioners had an advanced degree, which is defined as a master's, a PhD, or a professional degree like an MBA, or had just a bachelor's degree. And you'll see here that in 2012, around about 47% had a bachelor's degree, and then the inverse, about 53% had an advanced degree. Whereas by 2017, just 5 years later, a really dramatic increase here where the percentage of candidates with a master's degree had gone up to being close to 60%. So more and more H-1B petitions are candidates entering in with an advanced degree. So that's looking at, so we looked at salary levels, education levels. This chart from the USCIS shows country of origin for H-1B petitioners. And so, perhaps unsurprising, we'll see that the numbers have held actually relatively steady over the last 5 years. So unsurprising to see the majority are individuals who are from either India or China. But what's also interesting is if you comb through the data, you'll find that actually over 200 countries represented in total in terms of those H-1B petitions. So just a really diverse group in aggregate. So in this final couple of slides on data, before we shift to how you can use this within your organization, we wanted to share a couple of examples on the green cards side of things as well, since most of what we've been sharing to date has been on the non-immigrant visa side of things. So this first slide we thought some of you may find interesting because it puts green card applications here into context. And this shows essentially the mix, and it shows the mix of green cards in terms of family-based, employment-based, refugee asylum-based, and all other. And what you'll notice is, and the mix has stayed pretty constant over the last 5 years here, you'll notice here that actually employment-based green cards really are just a fraction of the total green cards that are issued. So it's only, in 2018, 120,000 compared to the total green card issuance, which was just north of 600,000. So it helps us perhaps put that into context, if that's which may well be of interest to some of you. So as we dive in more specifically into those employment-based green cards, this data gives you a sense of the numbers in terms of the number of completions. So you can see here the trends over time, and they haven't varied dramatically. They sit around 120,000 to 135,000, and then you can see the approval rate piece here as well. And surprisingly, the approval rate here actually for employment-based I-45 actually has held steady, but then declined in 2018 to now being sort of around 91, 92%, having previously been more like 94, 95%. So not quite a dramatic change as we've seen on the non-immigrant side in terms of approval rates for H-1Bs and for L visas, but a little bit of a decline here on the green card side as well.
So Manu and Ryan, that's going to bring us to, well, first off, thank you Manu for presenting all this helpful data visualization. So that's going to bring us to our final section, how this data can help our attendees and their organizations. So I'm going to bring it to this next slide here. And what should our attendees know, and how can they utilize this data?
Yeah, no, thank you. No, great question. So we believe that there's a real opportunity for leading-edge immigration programs to be much more data-centric, and both in analyzing their own data and also looking at some of the trends in the market, in the landscape that we've shared today as well. And so a few just sort of practical examples of what does this really mean in real terms. Well, how can this actually help you? The first, as we referenced earlier, is it can help you understand trends, and it can help you contextualize, what this could mean for your own organization in the future, but also how you stack up against others. And we went through trends on RFE rates, approval rates, so on and so forth. The second is you can look and see the level of scrutiny and so what that may potentially impact the strategies. You look and see what the implications are of some of these trends. The third is, which I think can be very useful, not just for mobility teams, as I mentioned, but also for global talent acquisition teams and for comp and benefits teams, is you can look and you can analyze your competitors, and you can see what do their hiring practices look like, what do their salary levels look like, what kind of roles are they hiring for, are they growing their hiring, are they shrinking their hiring, etc. And so you give you a really interesting sort of sense of competitive insight. And similarly, you can do that, of course, on a local geography level as well, which in many cases may be potentially even more relevant. And so these are some of the ways I think that this data can be very helpful. And we know from many of the clients that we work with, they found this data very helpful also with sharing with their CHRO or with their CTO and other members of the executive team who are looking for the sort of information to better understand what's happening in the immigration landscape once you get sort of beyond the rhetoric. And this provides a really powerful fact-based data set that I think can be incredibly valuable. So how can you get this data? We'll just talk about a couple of resources that you may find helpful. The first is actually a bit different. This actually is not public data. This is actually our own report that we run at Envoy. And many of you on this call may well be very familiar with this. But for those who are not, we run an annual survey of just over 400 HR professionals and hiring managers. And we use this survey to really do a pulse check on immigration. What are HR leaders experiencing in terms of the challenges? And also just what are some of their best practices, what are some of the policies they have in place, so on and so forth. So it can be a great way of just seeing how are your peers thinking about foreign talent and immigration, what are some of the best practices, what are some of the norms, for example, on when to start a green card, etc. And this is a survey that we do every year. As I mentioned, we've done it for the last 4 years, and the fifth year, this year, will come out in the beginning of 2020. So something to keep your eyes peeled for. A second, if you're looking for information for immigration data or even just news, we do offer a weekly newsletter. And what we do at Envoy is we look at major news stories on employment-based immigration, both in the US and globally. We curate those articles and we provide that to you with an email every Monday morning. So many of these articles include facts and figures on what's happening. So that in itself is helpful data. But even outside of that, it can be valuable if you're getting questions from employees or from executives. It allows you to sort of have the latest news at your fingertips and be able to perhaps respond to those questions and be in the know. And so again, if you're interested in that, just email us at Envoy or sign up on our website. We'll be happy to add you to that newsletter. And then finally, on the data resource side, and this is a little bit of a plug here. This will be coming soon. We are launching Envoy Insight. We are. Okay. I forgot one more page. I skipped the page ahead. So my fault. Before I come to that, so 2 more things to go. So this third thing here is as part of Envoy Insights, which is our data science work, we can do some of this benchmarking for you. So if you're interested in knowing how do you compare on some of the elements we discussed today, we'd be happy to do a benchmarking report for you. We can include some of the companies that you're interested in looking at, as well as, of course, cover different geographies you're interested in too. And this can talk about, give you a sense of who's hiring foreign talent, who's growing quickly, average salary levels, so on and so forth. So if that's of interest, just reach out to us. I'm happy to help. And the final one, which I was just I jumped ahead to, is Envoy Insights, which will be launching very, very soon. This will be a site that will provide you with much of this data in a very visual form that will allow you to look at what's happening across the country in immigration, get some of these facts and figures in a way that can be helpful to you, your team, your employees, and others in your business. So more on that to follow. If you're interested in that, again, just sign up to our blog or to our newsletter, and we'll be publishing details once that's ready for launch.
Great. Manu, thank you so much for that. That's going to bring us to our question and answer session. Looks like we have about 5 minutes left. We've already had some questions coming in, but I want to give another minute or two for some additional questions to come in. Before that, just want to remind everyone of some upcoming webinars that we have. Next week, we have a webinar focusing on global rotation programs. Highly encourage you to check out that. And additionally, we are rerunning the definitive guide to H-1B alternatives. This webinar went over H-1B alternatives, such as the L-1A, L-1B, O-1. So if you are curious about what those options are, please sign up. You'll notice that the first date is July 25th, but we are also offering it on multiple dates, so you can choose a date that'll work best for your schedule. And as always, and as Manu mentioned, please sign up for our mailing list so you can receive webinar invites when Envoy Insights launches and our Immigration News Digest. All right, so going back to this slide, I'm going to go to some questions real quick that are coming in. So going back to the data, this individual wants to know, I'll leave it open for the floor for Manu and Ryan. Can I incorporate this data into my immigration policy?
Yes, I think you can certainly use this information to help shape your policy. We would definitely recommend always working with your attorney, your legal counsel on developing immigration policy, but I think certainly this data can be very helpful in shaping your policy. Certainly, for example, the Immigration Trends Report, which gives you a sense of some of the policies and best practices used by hundreds of companies across the country.
Great. Let's see here. So this question is, I'm located in Austin, which we highlighted. How do I benchmark my company?
Great. If you want to benchmark your company, just reach out to us. If you get the Envoy website, you'll be able to request a benchmarking analysis. We'll be happy to provide that information for you. We can certainly cover the Austin market for you as well.
And Ryan, this one it has to do with the recent bill that passed the House regarding lifting the green card country cap.
Sure.
Just generally, how do you interpret that bill?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's two bills, right? There's the Senate bill and the House bill. The House bill is getting all the attention right now. And so for everyone to know, Manu talked about the fiscal year, October 1st to September 30th. During that time, there are 140,000 green cards, and right now, each country has a 7% cap. So that's why people from India and China have to wait so long. They meet their cap immediately. So what the bill provides is that they're going to remove that 7% cap. It will push people from India and China. So people from India, they don't have to wait 10 years anymore. Maybe it's going to be 5 years. But it's detrimental, of course, to everyone from any other country, because usually they can apply sort of quickly. Now it could be a couple of years. So it has benefits and negatives. But as Manu showed in the data, most people are from India. So I think it's a net positive. the Senate bill quickly. It requires people to post an LCA on the government's website for 30 days before they can even file the LCA for an H-1B. That would have a huge detrimental impact to the H-1B community and hiring people on time. So we'll just have to wait to see until the two bills are reconciled and all that stuff.
Any sense on how it may impact different industries?
I think it will be beneficial to the tech sector. Usually that's heavy hiring within people from India. That's speculative. Yeah. True.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you. Just some final parting words, I guess. Manu, Ryan, anything that you really want our attendees to walk away from today's webinar with?
No, I think, first of all, thank you all for joining today's webinar. I think perhaps one takeaway that I'd add is just there's a lot of data out there, and we think it can really help you build a better immigration program to take advantage of it.
Totally agree, and use the data to your advantage.
Awesome. Well, Ryan and Manu, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. To all our attendees, thank you. As another reminder, this recording and the slide deck and the continuing education credits will be emailed out tomorrow afternoon. Have a great weekend. If you're in the Chicago area, stay cool. It's going to be a hot weekend. All right. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.